Hey, my name is Zeus Tapado, a writer for Healing Maps, and can we use VR to trick our brains into a psychedelic trip? I know it's crazy for me to suggest that VR can trick your brain into a psychedelic trip, especially since I've been saying for the past 2 years that VR cannot trick your brain into a psychedelic trip. But I have some ideas. Okay. Imagine your reality as a container for a psychedelic trip, like a giant bowl in which psychedelics mix with your unique neurochemistry, personality, life experiences, and current environment. Basically, the set and setting you always hear about. Let's call this base reality tripping. Just good old psychedelics and your brain. But what about the virtualization of reality with extended reality, also called virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality? It's just easier to call it all XR, so that's what we're going to do. We know VR feels real when you put on a headset, but can extended reality leave biomarkers in our base reality? Surprisingly, our brain does a poor job distinguishing between both reality and extended reality. And this fault has led to some incredibly dope science. One of the most groundbreaking XR studies happened in 2004 by Dr. Hoffman. Wait, not Albert Hoffman, who was the guy who invented LSD. We're talking about another guy, Dr. Hunter Hoffman. Hoffman wanted to see if pain thresholds could be altered through VR. He used a game called Snow World, which is basically a simulation where a person is immersed in a winter wonderland of ice, snow, and somewhat creepy snowmen. Keep in mind, this was 2004, back when Game Boy Advance SP reigned supreme, and years before the Oculus Rift was even invented. The tech was primitive, but they still made it work. Oh, and to test pain thresholds, participants were basically burned until they felt it. It's called thermal pain simulation, and it's not as crazy as you may think, but it definitely burns. What they discovered was VR immersion in the cold environment of Snow World allowed subjects to withstand pain longer than those without VR. Guys, I don't think you understand how incredible that is. XR causes a cascade of neurological processes that translate to biological mechanics that allows a person to increase their pain threshold. That's amazing. That reality container that we talked about earlier has now expanded. Literal biological thresholds have been increased, and it's attributed to the virtualization of reality through XR. So what happens when we combine psychedelics with XR? Well, it can get weirder than you can imagine. Through mostly fMRI data, we're learning how psychedelics modulates the brain, alters the limbic system, which is the amygdala, thalamus, even slops up the neuronal connections with the default mode network and the frontal parietal network, among a lot of other things. Unfortunately, fMRI technology doesn't allow head movement, and in XR, head movement is everything. However, we do have brain imaging technology that can allow for head movement. It's called functional near-infrared spectroscopy, and it has really good spatial precision and pretty decent temporal precision. As of now, there are 0 FNIR studies that combine XR with psychedelics. Regardless, we have ample evidence that shows XR does a pretty decent job at replicating reality. So, if our brains can be tricked into thinking virtualized reality is reality, would perceptual alterations inside VR that mimic the same perceptual alterations associated with psychedelics be enough to activate the brain network seen with psychedelic use? That's a massive question, and the path to that answer is pretty bizarre. Here's why. Changing reality to an XR psychedelic landscape won't be enough because that's just not how trips work. It's the subtle alterations, enhanced colors, objects, small rippling in landscapes, spatial distortions. The psychedelic experience is much richer than floating elephants. Also, we can't ignore the process of ingesting a substance prior to tripping. The pharmacological delivery of psychedelics seems to have enormous effects on the quality of a trip. But what if a placebo is taken instead of a real psychedelic? prior to entering this virtualized reality. Once this XR reality begins to trip, will placebo be the catalyst to make our brains believe that we're indeed tripping? Don't sleep on placebo. There are many studies that show placebo is as effective as the actual drug, and sometimes better than the drug itself. Placebo even works when people know they're taking a placebo. We would learn a lot if virtualized reality was created to look identical to a person's base reality, like, let's say, a virtualized clinical setting. Have a person take placebo, then record brain data as this virtualized reality slowly alters exactly like a psychedelic trip. There are limitations though. VR needs more sensory inputs like vestibular sensations to effectively be able to recreate a psychedelic experience. Also, FNAIRS is dope, but it's still limited to data from cortical regions of the brain. It can't go deep like fMRI. So if regions of interest in the brain are areas like the visual cortex, we may be able to get some data to see how it compares to what we know about psychedelic modulations of the brain. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe.